Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first panel of the day. It's Red Alert, making push notifications meaningful to the audience. I'm Shubhajit Banerjee, and I'll be your moderator today, so I have the easiest job. But we have some fantastic people on the panel, and let me introduce them to you. I'll start with Brian, far right. Brian is lead news curation editor at BuzzFeed's London office. Prior to joining the mobile world, she worked in non-profit radio, TV, and editorial photography. She loves storytelling in all of its forms, but is especially obsessed with podcasts. On any given day, you'll find her breaking down content into digestible and shareable formats across BuzzFeed's distributed channels. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Next is Madeline, and Madeline Welch. She is the associate editor of the Guardian Mobile Innovation Lab in New York, a project funded by the Knight Foundation and housed within the Guardian US newsroom. This experiments with small screen storytelling formats. Madeline writes much of what appears in the notifications and also documents them on the lab's Medium page. She's a former Google Journalism Fellow at Nieman. And last but not least, Nick Newman. Nick is Associate Fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in Oxford, where he researches and writes on the future of digital media. He's lead author of the Digital News Report, the world's biggest and most authoritative survey of changing news consumption, and more pertinently for this panel, he's the author of the Institute's 2016 report on news alerts. Great to have you all here. Before we start, just a quick word on the format. We're going to have a free-flowing discussion for about 15-20 minutes with just maybe a couple of slides from each of the presenters. And then we'll jump into audience Q&A and hopefully have some questions from the Facebook Live feed as well. Right. So why are we talking about news notifications today? Increasingly, we're consuming news almost exclusively via breaking news alerts, and for many of us, the smartphone lock screen is becoming our new inbox. But are news organizations making the best use of this powerful tool? Are users receiving truly personalized, useful alerts, or are too many and too similar alerts making them switch off altogether? Let's find out from our panel. Nick, I'll start with you as an industry observer and someone who's literally written the report on notifications. Just set the scene for us, describe the current state of affairs. How effectively do you see media organizations utilizing notifications?
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to go through maybe 3 slides, which hopefully sort of set out some of the key data points. So we've been looking at this since about 2012, so asking people how people find news, and what we've seen broadly is it's the biggest growing area, basically. It's grown by about 3 times. In some countries, up to 30% of internet users are now say that they're getting news from mobile alerts. And sort of my key theory is that this has a lot further to go. So if you think about as mobile becomes the primary digital device, and then I think the lock screen and the notification center and the sort of software that's going to come along with that, I think, will become the key discovery mechanism for news. So it will become as important as Facebook Instant Articles and some of these other platforms that we talk about today. Before we get too excited, though, we did some work last year looking at smartphone users in 4 countries, so basically UK, US, Germany, Taiwan. And what we found was that people get a lot of notifications, but of course, news is only part of that picture. So on average, something like 90% of people are getting some kind of alerts. Most of them, and the ones that are most valuable to them, are those personal alerts, so maybe WhatsApp or Facebook or text messages. So you have to realize that that's the context within which news appears. So around news is about it's important. It's about a third of that. Again, within the news and information sphere, you have sport alerts, weather alerts, also important as well. The good news is that 3/4 of those people think that the alerts they get are valuable. So there's kind of a sort of myth that everyone hates alerts, and actually people are broadly finding this stuff quite useful. So that's, if you're planning to push alerts, news alerts to people, you need to recognize that is the space you're in. Basically there's a lot of other alerts. News has to be valuable and fight for space in that area. The second point is, at the same time, people are really wary. So we asked this question, do you agree or disagree? The personal nature makes you have to be careful about the type of information that you get on this device. So there's something about the device and the personal nature, which means that, it's really valuable to them and it's very personal and all those opportunities. But on the other hand, people are really wary of what they have there. More wary in some countries than others. And that sort of intrusion that you alluded to, so things like it keeps buzzing until we talk to people as well as just doing survey. It keeps on buzzing until you see them. It's bugging you all day long. This sort of compulsion to check your alerts immediately. It's a good thing and a bad thing. But on the other hand, there's also a subset of people who felt completely in control, that they can swipe things easily, they didn't mind having a few too many, and confident in my ability and knowledge to have a control of things. So I think there's a real issue around digital literacy, and you've got these two very different types of users. But obviously you need to be careful about invading this personal space with things that aren't relevant to people. That's the sort of main point. And 23% say they have uninstalled an app because of the notifications. That is general, it's not just to do with news, but obviously that is the danger, that you will kill this opportunity. And then reasons for using news alerts, it's relatively obvious, but it goes back to sort of core needs. This point about relevance, keeping me informed on topics relevant to me is critical and the most important thing. That's not just the breaking news. One of the things we uncovered was that there is a huge latent interest in having other relevant things sent to you. So currently it's all primarily around breaking news, but there's a huge potential for things that are relevant to my work, relevant to my passions. That's a huge opportunity. Worries about safety security surprised me, and bigger in some countries than others. So we did this at the time with a lot of terrorist attacks or shootings in the US, and this came up pretty high. So again, that sort of explains why the breaking news thing is important. Being first to know about important news, this skewed male, by the way. Knowing about it first, telling other people, conversation starters. When you think about the alerts you send out, it's very much, playing into that. Okay, I know, I'm going to tell you, and you start a conversation with it. So is your alert a conversation starter, I think is really interesting. So yeah, just a few data points to kick off. My overall takeaway, massive potential outside breaking news. The key is to understand what people want and to personalize the content and take advantage of the sort of passions that people have outside just breaking news.
Excellent, thanks, Nick. Madeline, I'll go to you next. Tell us a bit about the Guardian Mobile Lab, what it's set up for, and also the experiments you've conducted around specific events and your learnings from them.
Sure. Hi, I'm Madeline Welsh. I'm the Associate Editor at the Guardian US Mobile Innovation Lab. This is my first slide. I'll just go through a couple of experiments that we've run over the first year. I'll start by saying that the Mobile Innovation Lab is a project that is funded by the Knight Foundation, enabled by The Guardian. We work within the Guardian US newsroom in New York. But we're also working for the industry. A key mandate that we have is that everything we do has to be transparent, and we have to share all the learnings. So anything we learn about storytelling for the smartphone lock screen, or even beyond the lock screen, we have to share. And we do that in a variety of ways, speaking on panels, but also on our Medium page. So this is our team. We are headed by two really incredible women. Sarah Schmalbach is our product lead, and Sasha Koren is the lead editor of the lab. And then we have a whole host of others, including myself, two developers, a reporter, and then also a designer who works with us, as well as members of the US and UK Guardian newsrooms, the UK digital development team, some folks at Moss Media who help us with analytics, and then also Sam Morris at The Guardian, who is a designer who also works with us. And our team, we are a multidisciplinary, obviously, that's a lot of different roles, innovation team, and yeah, looking at that goal of working specifically for mobile. So this is a look at one of the first notifications experiments that we ran around the EU referendum vote, the Brexit vote. And it was an experiment that we did with Chrome web notifications using live data results and live polls. So we had 14,000 users worldwide. This was all on Android because these ran off of the Chrome web browser. And we found that we were successful in a lot of ways. We were able to drive page views back to the Guardian's Brexit Live blog. And we did this by having, so it's a live updating notification, which means that we were pulling information from a data feed that was coming from the voting precincts. And so every time you got a notification on your smartphone lock screen, on your Android, it would sit there, but then every time there was more updated information, that notification would effectively disappear and it would be re-updated with the new polling data. And so we sent this over the course of the vote. And yeah, as I said, 14,000 users. We also sent live polls during that time. So we sent out a prompt for a question. And we found that due to UK restrictions on the questions that you're allowed to ask during election times, one of those questions is not, who did you vote for? So instead we asked, what issue mattered most to you in deciding your vote? And so users were able to answer that question and then vote using the action buttons below within the Chrome web notifications. So if your answer was, I thought the impact on the economy was the reason why I cast this vote the way that I did, then you tapped on the button that appears on the left to you. If you thought it was one of the other ones that's within the body of the notification, then you tapped on another action button to move forward and then vote that way. In our experiments, we look for both quantitative and qualitative data. So after the experiment is over, we also send out surveys to all of the users, and we're able to send those out through a notification as well. And we found that our survey respondents from this experiment said that they were really interested in getting more alerts specifically on this topic, and particular about the economic impact of Brexit. So that was a really interesting way that we could find to ask the users who had been so engaged in this project exactly what it was that they wanted from us in the future. So I'll just kind of speed through the other two notifications that we did. So after that Brexit notification experiment, that was really a great proof of concept for us moving forward in the idea that live data notifications were something that people really wanted and responded to. And so what we were able to do by the time of the US elections was that we were able to work them into the Guardian's core iOS and Android apps. And so on election night in the United States, we were able to, for users who subscribe to these, and you could find them through the settings screen, we sent notifications that we think provided a really easy, convenient, and friendly way to get the most updated information to your screen, again, in that same format of updating with the most recent information about what was going on what turned out to be a really surprising night for a lot of people. We ended up with 230,000 subscribers worldwide. That was 170,000 on Android, and also 60,000 on iOS. And we sent over 800,000 page views to the Guardian live blog, which was a proof too. I think there was an initial worry there that by providing all of that information on the lock screen, that you were kind of disincentivizing people to go actually to the page. And we found that that wasn't true. The people who wanted more information then tapped through and were sent to the live blog, where they were then able to engage with the really wonderful interactives that the Guardian had built for that night, where you could see even more specific information. We found that 74% of users eventually tapped through on the alert, and that in the survey, we found that 70% of those respondents to the survey said that they had expanded the alert. So this is, sorry, I should back up for a second. This is an expanded view of what it looked like on Android. there was also a smaller view that showed you just the most recent vote count. And 98% of the people who took people who responded to our survey said that they would definitely or maybe sign up for this type of alert again, which we took as great news. And then the most recent thing that we've done is a live video stream within a notification. We ran this on Inauguration Day in the United States. So for this, it's possible. So we built or rather, Alistair Coote, who is a developer on our team, built an app that we use specifically at the mobile lab for experimentation purposes. And so for this, we were able to use a tool that was built by the other mobile lab developer, Connor Jennings. And we were able to send this live stream through a notification. So you received a notification, it had a little bit of context about what was in the actual video. If you expanded it, you could exactly see the notification or the live stream as it happened. We were using a stream from Reuters. While it is a smaller sample size, that's because it came from the mobile lab specific iOS app rather than the Guardian's core app. The metrics that we found from that initial experiment with live video notifications, we found to be really, really wonderful. We found that the average viewing time was 3 minutes per user, which is longer, very long for something that you would look at in a notification, and also matches up with kind of what conventional wisdom is on how long people will watch video for on the internet. Again, users tapped into our live blog. And from our survey, 98% of the users who saw this notification said that they would like this for breaking news. And actually, I think last week, NBC went and put a live video stream and notification, which we were excited to see as a point of adoption within the industry. So my last slide here is just a look at the kinds of things that we're thinking about at the lab right now. We think that this is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the interesting formatting that people can do within notifications themselves. We think that the idea of running these alerts, not just as one-offs, but as like an ongoing way to engage with an audience around a specific event, is a really great way to engage with audiences and allows those who want more information on that event to be able to really easily receive it in a really glanceable context. And last, we think that, so for many of these experiments, there was a way that we programmed into it that if users were done doing the experiment, they could opt out at a certain point from within the notification itself. And we think that putting the user in control of their settings within the notification allows them to really choose their level of engagement with the notifications. And we hope also will, to Nick's point, take them away from, hitting like, the nuclear option, which is just turning off all notifications or deleting your app. Really starting with the idea that it's okay for your user to be like, you know what, this is great, thank you so much, but I'm also done with this right now. I'll re-engage later when it's something that I need more interest in. We think that there's a lot of potential for that. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Madeline. On to Brian. BuzzFeed started doing alerts by topics or categories quite early on. And I've seen you do emojis in alerts as well. So tell us a bit about your thinking and what's worked and what hasn't worked for BuzzFeed.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Breen O'Brien, as it says, and I am the lead curation editor for BuzzFeed News in London. Now, when we launched the BuzzFeed News app for iOS and Android 2 years ago, we found out that 2/3 of our downloads were by people between the ages of 18 and 34. So we're talking teens, college students, and young 30-somethings, who most of the time are consumed by their phone and whose attention span is short. So we were quite happy that we actually focused on buckets from the get-go because we wanted users to be able to decide what type of news they wanted delivered to their phones at any minute of the day. And so people can choose and opt into world news. We have US politics, UK news, celeb and entertainment, biz and tech, sport, and the list goes on. And what we find with that, and the whole reason that we have push notifications and the approach behind the app is behind a certain philosophy, and that is this: that almost everybody has that one friend who's really interesting and really witty and who's like the sparkling guest at the dinner party, and they always have that one anecdote that nobody else at the dinner party has, and we want to be that friend. So in order to do that, we basically go back to journalism 101. So before we craft pushes, we always ask ourselves, is this push confirmed? So is the information I'm sending confirmed? Is it factual? And is it well sourced? We also ask ourselves, is this self-standing? So the average reader gets a push notification and they look at it and they're confused. Obviously, that is not good and the opposite of what we're trying to do. And third, is this, aside from self-standing, is it contextual? Do I have room to add context to give this push a little extra oomph? Hence the reason we want people to click through and keep reading. Because we know when we craft pushes that the who, why, where, and how matter just as much as the what. So we want to provide context and background to major news events as they unfold. Now here we have two more examples. To the left is Prince Philip, which is a relatively recent one, and when he was stepping down from royal duties. Yet we managed to get in the line of what happened in the lead up to that announcement, and that was the fact that Twitter could not keep chill and went wild with speculation about his health. And we think that made the difference. And on the right is a somewhat older one, but the whole point of that story from Philando Castile's death is that he was shot on Facebook Live, on live video. So that was a key element of that story that we felt we were able to deliver. Now, in terms of why we have these notifications again, we want to inform people of important breaking news as it unfolds, and we want to bring clarity during fast-moving situations. So you might see a ton of alerts from the AP, for example, and they're not afraid to, say there's an active shooter situation in a shopping mall in Tennessee. We're okay to wait and push definitive injuries or the fact that the gunman is still on the loose, for example. And we also send push notifications because we want to delight and surprise our audience with news that they might find informative and useful and sometimes even entertaining. And if we can do that in a conversational tone, which oftentimes involves emoji because that is how people communicate these days, then we feel like we're serving our mobile audience. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot. I have a question for all three of you, mainly for the two of you because you're part of big newsrooms and news organizations. But Nick, you've worked at the BBC as well. Obviously, there are lots of advantages where you can either integrate your experiments into their core products or get some more resources. But what are the challenges of working with big news organizations and newsrooms?
Well, I think it goes back, we're all competing against each other always. And I think the biggest thing is that you have to find your unique voice. And for example, like we said, emoji, that is what BuzzFeed does, and we're happy to do it because we're trying to anticipate the media landscape, which is ever-changing. And we have the flexibility and the freedom, thankfully, to be creative and to take risks. So I think you have to really understand your audience, how they're consuming their news, and that's going to change on a day-to-day basis. It's constantly evolving, so you have to figure out what type of news they want to consume, where they're consuming it, and how, and adapt accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think as someone who has a phone that I basically refer to as my notifications phone, because I have so many apps on it that all send notifications, I notice a lot of the time it seems like there's a real tendency to be first with a notification. And of course, there are traffic benefits to being first with a notification. But the point that you really want to make sure that when you send the alert, it's the alert that you want to send. And then it meets your audience's needs and their wants, and the way that they appreciate being approached with information is really important because I've used this line before, but that space is not just for notifications. It's also for the place where people get their texts. It's the place where people find out I don't know if you're ordering food or something also too. That's not just a space where people get news, and so to kind of pollute it with bad notifications, I think is not great. But to go back to the initial question of working with a larger newsroom too, I mean, we're looking at kind of putting in new formats. So a lot of what we do is just kind of pushing to the boundaries of what we think is available right now on the platforms, seeing what makes sense, what can possibly be delivered in a newsroom, in a newsroom-like setting. And then finding out what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. And, we've had some of those so far, but bad ideas, I mean. But I think particularly working with our newsroom, it's been really wonderful to see their appreciation of experimentation and kind of willingness to push it to the edges.
I think the key thing is, relating notifications to the core thing that you're trying to do. I think that always works. Obviously, it works with management to show that by delivering these notifications, you're getting more regular habit to your app, for example, which is something that relates to the core objectives. I think in terms of the newsroom, it's about, again, sort of explaining how this fits with their workflow and also not making things difficult. So you're sort of creating these complicated workflows so that it's just as easy as possible. It fits into what they do, and they can see the value of it. Again, coming back in the live data that they see on their screens.
Thanks. I'm also curious how you measure the effectiveness of alerts, because it's not just click-through rates. Often alerts are kind of self-serving. How have you been doing that, and what are the challenges there as well?
Yeah, so I think it is hard with click-through, right? And we have daily app reports that we do monitor, but we look beyond just an app because, again, no one is just reliant on just an app. They are on social, they're on various apps. And so we figure out what we look at is what stories are doing well and how they're resonating and where they're resonating. So whether that's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it could be various things, Snapchat, that's what we also look at. And aside from just clicking, if they feel confident that our alert gave them enough information, which is the key versus sending like 6 alerts of the same topic, unless it is very much a breaking story, we try to keep it down to 1 or 2 so we're not alerting them every second. If they feel that they got enough from that and they can share it with friends, because we also make sure that we have a character count that is shareable on Twitter, which, you know, not everyone has a massive phone, so you have to make sure that your push notification is not getting cut off on the phone. That also does the trick for us to see, like, are they able to share it with their friends easily on various platforms? And so aside from just click through, we see who's sharing what story and what are they talking about and what did they gain from our notification.
Yeah, again, that's a great point. With particularly if you're looking, we've been talking a lot about this at the lab, that idea of like, when is a good notification a good notification? Of course, like if they tap through to more content, then you know that you did a good job. But at the same time, if your notification was just that good and you've given people like the exact amount of information that they need at that moment, it shouldn't feel like a punishment that they didn't come to your page. So we're looking at that right now. Is there a better system beyond just like click-throughs? You know, if they unsubscribe from your app or from your notifications, that's a bad sign. But that space in the middle, I think there's a lot of room there for better metrics.
I'd say that the key thing is you break down, you have a structure and a clarity of purpose, first of all. I mean, I really like the BuzzFeed sort of take on being the sort of sparkling guest at the dinner party, and you know that kind of guides everything. But then within that, you probably have different kinds of notifications, so you kind of have a language and grammar about that. And then for certain notifications, you'll then have click through as your main driver, and for other ones, you'll have something else. And I think BBC Sport do this really well. So what they found was that their sort of obviously goal alerts were not about a click back; they're just about getting the information out and marketing for the brand and all the rest of it. But they've now introduced this sort of second and third category, which is basically, okay, how can we get people back the next day with a video that's relevant to that person from a team that they support, which is fantastically effective. And that's all about the click-through back to a video. And so the way it's designed, the way it's targeted at particular people, and there's probably other stuff in between. And so there are also ones where you've got the choice. You know, you can either click through or read it there, and you're giving people the buttons. So you're measuring each of those things. So I think a structured approach to how you think about your strategy at the top level, break that down into different types, talk about that in the newsroom, and then you measure and obviously iterate and change those measurements as needed.
Yep. Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Sorry, but just to that idea, we also ask people through our surveys. You know, we ask them, was this alert useful? Did you find these helpful? Were they interesting to you? And then are able to kind of like tailor future experiments based on that information. Great.
I think we need to jump into audience Q&A now. But before that, one last question to each of you, and you have a choice here. You can either answer in a few words what you think is the future of notifications or alerts, or what is the worst or funniest alert you've seen, and this will reflect on you.
Am I going first? Okay. It was a recent one from Fox News, and it just said, most men just want a woman who's nice. And so I looked at it, and it was very much like a, okay, reaction. But furthermore, I said, is there a revolutionary poll that happened? Is something on Twitter? Are people talking about this? Like, why are you alerting me this? And clicked on it, and it was an opinion piece by a woman who interviewed 0 men. And it was like just a few paragraphs, and it told me nothing, and it angered me, and I wanted to opt out. So don't do that.
As someone who writes notifications when people send breaking all caps : at the start of their notification, it angers me deeply on the level of like, what a waste of space. If you're sending a notification, like, I already know that it's breaking, please don't do that.
And that probably applies on Twitter as well.
It definitely applies on Twitter as well.
There was a Titanic sinks 102 years ago tonight, which was not, by the way, a breaking news notification. It was actually on a breaking on CNN on live television. So that some of the worst actually are on that. I want to talk about the future thing. I think the future is really interesting in this space. I think the way the platform's developed, and I don't know what Google's plans are and Apple's plans are, but I think richer notifications, this idea of rich mobile moments, which you beautifully illustrated. This is all coming. This is going to be a platform where there's somewhere between. It will be layered. You've got your little notification, and then you can expand it. And then there's rich mobile moments in there, and I think this is going to be a really interesting space. Obviously, voice notifications, we haven't talked about that. I mean, Amazon Alexa announced their voice. It can, from very soon. They've just announced it. It's coming. I think the key issue of literacy and how you give users control. Users are really confused right now. They don't know where they go to change these things. That's one of the things that's holding this back. That will be solved in the next 5 years. It will probably be the platforms that will help to do that, but publishers have a role to play in that. I think all of these things need to be fixed. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I think personalizing this, so understanding who your users are, passive personalization and overt personalization, all of those things I think are going to transform this space.
Excellent. I'm so glad you all went for the other one. Audience questions. Do we have any questions? We have one from Facebook, I can see, Facebook Live. Or do we have one here? Please.
Yeah, my name is Morten Carlsen, editor with Nettavisen in Oslo, Norway. I was just wondering, do you see a limit in how many pushes you can send within a news day? Let's take basic news, or for instance, for sports. What's the limit? It's 4, 5, 10? Have you tried to maximize it? What's the effect? And obviously do you need to send a push a day just to be in the push game? Or if nothing happens, shouldn't you send a push?
I think if you're thinking about personalization, I don't think there's necessarily a limit. There was a study that was just done in the States, something like 44 was the average that news organizations are sending right now. That's one of the reasons we're seeing more, is that there's much more content out there. But if you're doing the personalization, then you can send more that are relevant to those people, I think,
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I'll use the Brexit Chrome web notification experiment that we did as an example. To get people signed up for that notification, we put a link in what at The Guardian we call the stand first of the live blog. It's a series of bullet points right at the top of the live blog that gives you key events. But we also used it just to promote the fact that we were doing notifications there. We had them go to a mobile web page and they could tap on it. From there, we have a signal that they are interested in those type of alerts, and we also gave them a clear indicator of what those would look like. Because we were doing notifications from a live data feed, if you looked at them individually, we sent like 100 notifications, but because it was an updating notification and functioned more as a dashboard, it was one notification that lived there that they were allowed to engage with, or that they could choose to engage with as much or as little as they wanted to. I think maybe too many too little pushes is a question that we have right now, but hopefully as we continue to push the limits of the format, it won't really be a question anymore.
Yeah, and I also think it just depends on your strategy as well. And again, like since we have buckets, we feel okay pushing maybe 2 to World, and then, if we have 5 entertainment pushes that day, if it's like the Golden Globes or something other, like if there's a major sport event, we will send it an infinite amount basically. But the point is, if, for example, if you're taking a breaking situation or if you're covering just one sport event, I would focus on all-encompassing alerts. I just don't think there's a need to send 7 back to back if they're quite vague and tell the user nothing, and you're alerting them on their phone, and the user is still saying, okay, you haven't told me anything. Tell me what I need to know, because then they're going to be scrambling. Do I tap to find out more? They have to do extra legwork, and you don't want that, because then they might get upset and opt out, or they might delete your app. So I would avoid that and think, how can you give all-encompassing, interesting pushes? Can you wait 5 minutes longer if it's a case of breaking, for example, or a sport event?
We take a question from Facebook Live and then come back to the room.
Thanks. So this question is about conversational alerts, noting that it was a topic in the opening keynote as well. Do you have some examples of some successful conversational alerts? And is there a time in the day or a day of the week that this kind of alerts is most appreciated?
I think BuzzFeed is great at conversational alerts.
Well, our philosophy is to say it like you'd say it to a friend, and that's why, we're not scared to do that, and we're not scared to use emojis. They are warranted in most situations. Some not, of course, if we're talking about a death of a prominent figure or a terror attack. But I think throwing an emoji makes things conversational because that's exactly what you'd say to a friend. Or, like the WannaCry ransomware, for example, we alerted people like, hey guys, using the alert emoji, this is happening, so upgrade your computer or look out. I think it's informing people of news that's happening, but in a way that you would tell a friend is the key point. And in terms of time of day, the news doesn't sleep. So that is a hard thing to measure for us personally.
Obviously, it depends on the brand. You need to be true to your brand. But I think, conversational is clearly, it's a very personal medium. People said to us that they only wanted the facts. They didn't want these emojis, but we were probably talking to older people. So that's probably why. But definitely not around serious news. So they definitely didn't want emojis around serious news. But we're much more open to all kinds of teasers and a bit of fun. In other circumstances. And that's the point, going back to the fundamental motivations. Sometimes it is just about whiling away time in the downtime. They're looking for something to do. Sometimes it's actually they just want to be informed. So it's always worth thinking about why people are getting those notifications and clicking on them.
Next question.
Per Östlund from Roxen in Sweden. Burdening your audience with push alert is quite a important thing. So who gets to make that ultimate decision during the day?
That's a very good question. Who makes that call?
For the core Guardian apps, that decision is made by the news editors, whoever is kind of running the desk at that time. For our Guardian mobile lab notifications, normally we'll have kind of plotted out what we think the overall flow of the notifications is going to be. So for the inauguration experiment, for example, we had the live video feed coming in from Reuters all day, and then as we were sending the notifications, we were kind of, we had a list going of things that we knew we wanted to alert to, the main moments of the day. But then, it turned out that day there were major protests in D.C., and so that was something that was happening on the feed. So we went and alerted from there.
Yeah, and for us, we have curation teams in London, New York, and LA, and so there's a lead editor in each that makes the call, but they work hand in hand with the news editors. But of course, like news editors will think news, and we know each bucket and we know each audience. So for example, we have entertainment, so we'll do, TV shows and films too, and we often make that call. For example, I had that Missy Elliott push on there, and we used a lyric, put your thing down, flip it, and reverse it, and people loved it because she had just dropped an album for the first time, and people went wild with it. But if you ask a news editor, should I send this, and should I do it in this way? Of course they're gonna say no, but that's why you have designated people who understand each platform beyond the news, but you do have to work across teams on a day-to-day, no doubt.
I'll make a slightly flip comment that I think today it's about us pushing stuff to them and they get what we send them. I think in the future the people making the calls will be the users, will be the audience. They will decide what they see and they'll have the controls to do so. I don't think that's the case at the moment, but I think that's where we'll be.
Do we have any more questions from live? Any other questions in the room?
Hi, my name's Lisa. I'm from Politico in the US. I'd be curious to your thoughts or evidence that you might have found around speed with notifications. I feel like in the newsroom, there's always just a general focus on being one of the first to break a story and get the scoop. And so we assume with notifications, this is probably true, that it's great to be the first one to get the push alert out. But, and we come from that with like a newsy perspective, but for users, I wonder if they feel the same way. If you're the first to put out a notification, if somebody's getting a lot, then it actually gets pushed down to the bottom. Just wondering kind of, what your thoughts are around speed with notifications in general.
Most people don't have, most people here probably get multiple notifications from a single, you're not a typical audience. So most people are only getting one set of news. So your experience is not the same as everyone else's. Again, I think it's true. It depends on the brand. If your brand is about breaking news, then being first is crucial because it's about supporting your brand. The thing that annoys me about speed most is when you click through and the apps open slowly. I think that's one of the biggest problems. Again, it's another thing which is holding up notifications, and it's another reason why those sort of intermediate screens are going to be so important. And media companies really need to think about their first load of their app currently because it's killing the user experience.
And I just add to that, it's improved a lot, but what used to happen a lot is you click through and it's that same one line because they've just about managed to do that one line. I see BBC particularly, they've been doing it for a while. They were doing it, but then now by the time you go there and refresh the page, they've added a bit more. So I think it makes sense to be aware of that if I've just seen this alert and that's quite information rich, and I go through and I see nothing, that sort of it's not a great experience.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think you have to know, again, it goes back to the brand of knowing, like, do they want the hard news line, or is there something that a little extra you can give them that's actually going to make them click? So if this is, we did during beta testing, so non-news junkies, let's say, who did get a series of notifications from different outlets, and on their feed they could basically, because we're talking about a few minutes that it could happen where outlets are finally picking up the pace, and back to back, they would scroll down and say, what is the most compelling? For a few people, it was the language. So for example, that one where we had the element of Facebook Live, because we knew our users wanted the social part, like that is the biggest thing. It wasn't the news that this was another death of a black man. It was the fact that it happened on Facebook Live in addition that people really were compelled to click. So I think it's thinking about your brand and what information they do want.
Yeah, I think, just going back to the name of the panel, making push notifications meaningful to the audience. If you're sending, that should be the most important thing. Like, your push should be meaningful to who you're sending it to. You're not sending it into a void. You're sending it to a person. You're sending it to your readers, and you're sending it to someone who you want to like you also. I think it's really important to keep that idea, to keep the user at the center of what you're sending to them. And yeah, I think it's really easy to get into, a first competition amongst ourselves. But yeah, back to the original point, we are not necessarily our audience when it comes to this. So making sure that everything you send holds up.
Do we have time for one last question, or one real quick one? Lady on the left.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Lauren and I'm a journalist with the FT. I just wondered, if you send out something which is wrong or which has a typo in it, how do you handle that? Do you have the same obligation to send a breaking correction that we would have with our .com, or do you override it, or do you just hope that no one sees it? Or is there any way to actually pull it back once it's gone?
There's no way to pull it back. When it's sent, it's gone. But this is a great question because, if you think about it too, notifications for a lot of people are kind of, the lock screen is the front page. It is my personal belief that we should be keeping a record of all of the push notifications that get sent because it's important that they are correct.
Great. On that note.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists. And thanks to Subhajit for an amazing moderating job. So we're about to have lunchtime. Just a reminder, the demo room has lots of great demos going on. I think they're sticking around for a few minutes, so if you wanted to swing by there now, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, thanks to our live audience, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you this afternoon.